Good morning. Today we're going to talk about regulations again. I've done a couple of videos talking about regulations in general and some specifics about these areas, but the reason for today's video is in Madera County now considering regulations even though they haven't in the past. I won't say no regulations, but basically it's been very flexible. There is a draft, and now they've gone through 2 drafts. They've had multiple workshops. They've solicited a ton of community feedback and input. And there was a meeting yesterday at the Board of Supervisors to basically get a readout from the team that's leading this effort and also to solicit more community feedback. So we are going to discuss where the process is so far and some of the implications for STR investors in specifically Oakhurst or Madera County. I'll just say that overall the regulations are more flexible, we'll say, than Mariposa County. Mariposa County has a pretty strict process and some limitations that are a bit onerous. Number one, a limit to 3 bedrooms max, 10 guests max. Lots of other stuff. Mariposa County is not the subject of today's video. So in Madera County, they have been considering all of the potential regulations and considering quite a few things. And I'll just say at the top, it looks like they're going to allow at least 5 bedrooms. Maybe only 10 guests. That's still undecided, but there was input along those lines. But I would say, again, generally a bit more flexible. Now, the one area of most concern was the fact that they were going to only allow 1 STR permit per parcel. No matter how big the lot, 1 permit. Now, up to this point, they actually are taking the position that it's always been this way. But I have several investors that have properties with 2 homes, or in one case, they converted a garage into a second dwelling, and both homes, both residences are listed on Airbnb and doing quite well. That has been a formula for success. And again, as part of this permit process and regulation process, the county is stating that is the way it's always been. But they got a lot of pushback. A lot of lots up here are acreage. My house is on 2.5 acres, 5 acres, and on up. Their latest draft states that the owner can get an STR permit for 2 homes on a lot that's zoned to allow 2 homes. So probably basically anything over an acre lot is going to be zoned to accommodate 2 residences. So if there is already one or there is space for one, that's also fairly easy to verify using county records. That's a big win, honestly, of everything that has been discussed and considered. For me, that's the biggest. Another opportunity up here is, like I said, just buy a cash flowing property that has 1 home and then add a second home, and you're going to definitely improve the financial performance. That's big news and very welcome. I think that most of the other things that are in the draft proposal are pretty straightforward. Regarding the number of guests, there was some pushback in the council meeting from some of the Board of Supervisors. Basically, this idea that, hey, we've stayed in Airbnbs and there's a big loft, and does that count for a bedroom? And the fact that they were considering the occupancy based on 2 guests per bedroom plus 2 for the house may be too restrictive for some properties. Now, one of the reasons why they are trying to limit the number of total guests, and again, there have been different numbers bandied around, a big driver and motivation for doing this in the first place is just being a good neighbor and not interfering with the peace and quiet of the neighborhood. And honestly, the bad actors are typically homes that can accommodate 20, 30 or more guests, and there's cars all over, and they're causing a ruckus, and they're not disposing of their trash properly, and they're lighting fires in the fire pit, and basically creating a nuisance. At some level, I understand the motivation, and what we've got to balance that against, obviously, is property rights. Can you do with your property what you want to do with it? And quite frankly, tax revenue for the county. So TOT, or tourism occupancy tax, is a significant contributor to the county from a revenue perspective. So they've got to walk this line and make sure that they're supportive of this industry, short-term rental, which helps support the community and quite frankly is, again, a key ingredient of the tourism economy, which is really the only industry driver in our area. So I think in general, I would say kudos for the team. They are taking input, not super excited with the first draft. They've made some necessary changes, I think. We are now at maybe the official draft 2. And then they were originally going for an August vote. That's not going to happen. They are now saying September. I suspect that might not happen. So I'm not quite sure when this will be voted on and go into law. But it is imminent and it is a process, and I will continue to give you updates. Just a couple of other points. Number one, there's been discussion about grandfathering. So essentially, the approach was originally stated as, hey, if you've got a vacation rental in this area and you're using the original process, was basically get a business license and tell us that vacation rental is your business, we'll let you continue with no interference or effect of these new regulations. Now, lately, it looks like they may have limited themselves to grandfathering in only on a couple of points. One is, how many vacation rentals can you own? So the regulation proposes 5. And again, this is, I think, designed to keep major corporations from moving in and dominating the market, which is not a bad thing. But also that the property could not be held in an LLC. And the point I made and many other people made, including some of the supervisors, is that's not really practical, and it doesn't really solve the issue you're trying to solve. And lots of individual investors or small groups, maybe a partnership, they utilize an LLC for tax and liability reasons. And it's not a sign that it's a big corporation. So one of the supervisors suggested they have to list the number of members of their LLC. So, maybe you put a limit on the number of owners and control it that way. So that is also still up to debate. But again, I talked about this in context of grandfathering. They still have to clarify, what do they mean by grandfathering? Are they grandfathering in everything? Are they grandfathering in only certain aspects of this? We don't know yet. And then the other point that was brought up, is this really something that you're going to have to do every year, or do you get it and then, it's done? Does it transfer with the property? Right now, the position of the team is no, but that could also change. Again, this is not to give you the conclusion because we're not there yet. It's, again, simply an update, timely because they've made some changes in the draft. And I would say good news because they are going to allow 2 per parcel in most cases. So that's the reason for today's update. Stay tuned, watch my other videos, subscribe to the channel, and thank you very much. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to walk through a couple of things here. I just want to introduce you to the process. The first part of this video, I kind of walk through some of the implications of the changes. This is the Madera County website, describes why they're doing what they're doing, and purpose, scope, and motivation. There's also links here for 3 different drafts, the last one being July 23rd. I will post a link to this page in the comments. And then also you can see here this workshop on August 6th. That's the one I was referring to in my video. And again, there were previous workshops as well. So with that, let me just jump over here. This is the actual latest draft. So again, a lot of verbiage here. You can follow that link and see the specific language, addresses, the application process, permit fee, renewals, requirements, etc. I think what might be interesting for this discussion is actually to jump to this, which is the Madera County STR Alliance. It's a organization of local citizens, a lot of realtors, a lot of vacation rental management companies. But basically they put this out on the 5th, just ahead of the last workshop, to point out basically what was the position of the group relative to different issues. So grandfathering was one, and it points out the response. The association or the alliance wanted grandfathering to allow their STR operation to transfer to the next owner at sale. However, the county's position is essentially they'll grandfather the existing operator, but if they sell, then that new buyer will have to go through the entire process and be governed by the new regulations. There was also a position taken on the annual re-permitting, and the association would want it to be kind of a one and done deal. But the county is saying, no, you're going to have to renew every year. So don't really understand what the fees and what the requirements will be for that renewal. Just the very fact that it has to be renewed isn't, I think, necessarily a huge issue, but of course they could make it onerous. The Alliance also objected to the limitation of 5 short-term rental properties per single owner. That was the cap that was proposed in an early draft, and the county has not basically changed that position, although they are allowing a corporation or an individual who owns more than 5 today to continue to operate those, not being affected by this new proposed regulation. Now, number 4 is the really big one in my mind. There are kind of 2 components to it. Number 1 STR per parcel. And as I said earlier in this video, the county's position is that's actually the way it's always been. But that is not how it's been enforced up to this point in time. And on this one, they are bending a bit and allowing a second STVR, that's their term, short-term vacation rental, to either exist or be built to be operated on parcels that are greater than 1 acre, as long as the zoning allows for a second unit or second residence. Now, the other component of this is they are not allowing ADUs and tiny homes in this allowance. So 2 things. A lot of people refer to smaller residences as ADUs. The county, at least in the workshops I've attended, have really been focusing on the recent California law allowing ADUs in cities and in areas that they would have not normally allowed a second residence. And basically there were tax and zoning allowances to provide for that. And what they're saying is if you built an ADU under that program, that you cannot short-term rent that ADU, which is actually consistent with the state's rules for those ADUs and junior ADUs. But like I said, there's older homes up here that have second dwellings. They may be referred to ADUs. I'm not quite certain how that would fit, and hopefully the county will clarify that. The other one is tiny homes. And again, I've made the case that tiny homes should not be an issue. They're actually great in terms of attracting the kind of guest that doesn't cause problems, does not have parties, is not a nuisance. And they also have higher occupancy. These smaller units for smaller groups have higher occupancy in the off-season, which is important for both owners and the county, who presumably wants to collect TOT tax revenue. So that one's still not, allowed. And by tiny homes, we're typically referring to tiny homes on wheels, which are classified technically as RVs and in fact are licensed by the DMV. I don't honestly have a lot of hope that they're going to flex on that, but I do have some contacts at the county. I will be reaching out. I think there's a strong argument to allow that. And then again, there's some language here about transferability and red lines, etc. I'm not quite sure how significant these are. Now, I will also say from some of the discussions and the county feedback and position, they seem to be focused on applying these standards uniformly across both short-term rentals as well as residents that live in the area, which I believe is fair, and hopefully they will continue that. But again, we don't know for sure. So the Alliance basically came up with a summary list showing what the ask was and what the response was in the second draft. Again, we absolutely believe there will be another draft, at least one more draft. So anyway, this is a good document. If you reach out to me either by phone, text, email, I'm happy to share this document with you. But again, it's just a summary of where we're at and a summary of what call it the STR proponents community is pushing for. So with that, I'm going to just shift to one more document while I've got you. So what's interesting about this is, in parallel with this much broader sweeping permit process and new regulations, the county, as an urgent matter, just released new fire regulations. Some of this would have been covered in the proposed new regulations. I'm not quite certain, other than the fact that we're in fire season, but they kind of rushed this through and into operation as of July 16th. So this has impact, I think, as you will see, and certainly as an Airbnb owner myself, it's affected some things I've had to do with my license. So again, like anything, this is the actual restriction. There's some things that make sense that you could argue are absolutely in the public good, and there are some things that maybe are a little bit questionable. So first of all, they don't allow wood burning fire pits. That kind of makes sense. They're not allowing charcoal briquette grills, which also, again, a lot of folks from the city visiting the mountains aren't aware of how should you handle these used coals. Maybe they dump them. I'm sure there's been some fires caused by either fire pits or barbecue. I'll kind of give them that. Probably makes sense. But if you dig into this, there are a couple things that are pretty onerous. And basically what they're saying, you can have a propane fire pit, which is great. You can have a propane grill, which is great. They're saying those grills, and presumably the fire pits also, have to be 10 feet away from any structure. So I can only speak for my house. We have concrete patio. We have modern siding, which is, I think by definition, somewhat flame retardant. We have a patio that has a metal ceiling. So again, I don't consider this at all a fire hazard, but they are now telling me that my grill has to be 10 feet from the house. I don't have a good place to barbecue 10 feet from my house. My concern is, what are you going to do? Push your barbecue out into the grass? That might be more of a hazard. And I would challenge the county to come up with statistics or examples where a propane barbecue caught a house on fire. But this is the new regulation as of July 16th, and it affects us all now. So I thought it was appropriate to add this to this discussion. So with that, I'll wrap up. We've got this permit process and new regulations that are in motion. Some progress has been made. Some improvements to the proposal have been made. I would say I'm generally encouraged, but do want to see where the final outcome is. A lot of realtors in particular have complained that this has sort of killed their business. I haven't seen it that way. I think it's important to understand, A, what the rules are, and B, what they may be moving forward. But I would also say that until they vote and this becomes law, there's a good chance that you could get in, close on your property, begin short-term renting, and be grandfathered in. So this isn't, I don't think, a signal to hold off. It might be a signal to move even faster. But in any case, I'm very happy to help you navigate this, understand what the implications are, and to consider these new rules as you search for property that would be good for your short-term rental business here near Yosemite. Thank you very much.